Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining. We are super excited to kick off this new webinar series. I'll give everybody a few minutes to jump on as we admit everybody in, but we're super excited to cover this relevant topic in such a time where we have technology shifts, economic shifts, social shifts, shifts all around in terms of what's happening in the workplace. And of course, managers are such a monumental piece of how we navigate these areas. So thank you for joining. I'll give it about a minute or so as I pay attention to who's joining so I can make sure we let everybody in, and then we'll kick off session one on this beautiful Thursday morning. All right. Excited to get started. Okay, and it looks like we're right at the top of the hour, so I'll keep my eye on as people join. But rewiring change. So there's a couple of things that I think have become really interesting, at least to me and our team at Management Cues, which I'll share a little bit about. And that's the neuroscience component to what's happening to us as we're experiencing change and how that benefits us as managers in the success of leading change, of navigating change, of helping others along the way be receptive to change. And these are all roles that we play as managers when we have changes in an organization, which happen all the time for so many reasons. And so let me start by sharing who we are, who Management Cues is, in case you've never heard of us before. So we're a management and leadership training company. And what makes us unique is not that we do training. What makes us unique is that we're scientifically proven to work. We're backed by neuroscience, which for us, what that means is that we actually had neuroscientists and engineers test our programming. And the core of our effort is really to understand the experiences that managers go through. So that's what makes us different. We measure, we track in training, we provide people with insights as to how they're performing, and we take a look at how they're experiencing managing, period. How they're living through and what that's actually doing behaviorally and from a neuroscience standpoint. So that's what makes us a little bit different. So, hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Mayra Austin, in case you've never met me before, and I'm more than happy to be here. I'm actually very excited for this webinar series. And so as I let everybody into today's session, I'm excited to kick off a different way at looking at change for managers. And we are going to use a pre-existing framework. We are going to use Kotter's 8 steps to change throughout this series. It's one of my favorite to use because I feel like it's more holistic, it's practical, and it does actually align with some neuroscience aspects that we've learned in testing and in practice. And so for this week 1 session, I'm excited to kick it off with the topic of the brain on change, right? And the reason we came up with that name was because something happens to us as we're experiencing change, but something also happens to us when we're leading it, right? And so there's this dynamic that the manager experiences that's a little bit different than the team member in front of them. And so creating urgency and building the coalition to be prepared to lead through change is actually part of the steps in Kotter's framework, but we took a neuroscience approach to it. So we hope that you'll enjoy it. So here we go. Let's kick it off. So today, what we're going to cover in this week 1 session, we're going to talk about the brain and what happens as we experience change. We're going to talk about why employees resist, which is all too common and should be expected. We'll cover a little bit of Kotter step 1 and 2 today, and then we will continue as we move through our series to cover the other steps and align it with neuroscience, which should give you an insight into understanding not only the importance of the steps, but how to make it actually work. Understanding how people function, how the brain naturally responds, I feel gives us a competitive advantage as managers. Then at the end, we'll cover some practical management steps that you can take when you're navigating through these 2 steps. And then we're sharing a management tool that you can actually use if you're right now dealing with change and have to lead through it. Some things that will help you ensure that the change actually moves through in the best way, the most efficient way. So I want to start with you kind of reflecting on something as managers on the call, or as HR leaders, or as team members that are looking to step into management. This series really kind of helps everybody understand change in a different way. But the question that I want you to think about is, think of the most recent organizational change you've been through. What was your immediate reaction? And be honest with yourself. You're not going to have to share it out loud or anything. It's really just you kind of reflecting on this, because I think it's an important thing for us to understand our natural kind of default response first. So what was your first reaction? Was it excitement? Were you thrilled to step into this? Was there a little bit of skepticism? Let's see how this goes. I'm not sure quite how it feels. I'm not sure if it's a threat to me or not. Did you immediately have a feeling of anxiety? We're not ready for this. We don't have enough resources. Please, not now, right? Those kinds of feelings. Was there curiosity? Was your default thought, what does this mean? What does this mean for me? Right? Because we all naturally have a reaction to change, and it varies depending on our perception, what we're experiencing at the time, what the environment is like. And so one really important fundamental thing for us to sit with, and as managers to really understand, is that our brains really are prediction machines, right? Before we actually process something, our brain has already left the building, right? Our brain has already started to think about whether what is happening is safe or is threatening. And it's any stimulus really that we experience day to day that puts us into this kind of hyperdrive. And it's just the brain protecting us, right? Protecting itself. And so this is why it's one of the reasons understanding what happens in the brain helps us not be frustrated as leaders and managers, not be angry at teams that respond a specific way, because we understand what is happening, right? And so it helps us just be more objective, be more clear around what decisions to step into, all of that. So the brain on change, what's happening when we're being introduced to a change is your amygdala starts to act as the threat detector. So that's kind of the first thing. And then the prefrontal cortex is the executive center. That's where you start to think about the decisions that you have to make, what you have to consider, right? You start to go through kind of the critical thinking process. The anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC, that's your conflict monitor. So as soon as you're introduced to change, you start to identify whether there is conflict taking place or whether something is going to be difficult. The hippocampus starts recording everything, right? So you start to think about previous experiences that you've had, and you're trying to connect those dots, because that's how you create your perception of that change that's now been introduced. The basal ganglia, that's the habit center, and we all have habits. And so we start to think about what I need to step into first, now that I know that there's a change here, right? The insula, that is the internal awareness center. So you start to think about how you're feeling. That's where the anxiety and however you're feeling starts to kind of get triggered. And then the nucleus accumbens, that's the reward center. So if the change feels good and you can clearly see that it's going to benefit you, that lights up, right? Because there's a clear connection to something that's going to benefit you. The default mode network, the DMN, that's where the reflection and meaning making starts to happen. And so if there's a disconnect between messaging, if what you see doesn't match what you heard, then that's where you start to make sense of it and you come up with your own conclusions, right? So now as managers, that's what's happening to us when we're informed that there's a change that's going to happen. So now think about your team members and your employees as they're receiving that change news from you. And all of this is happening to them as well, right? Because this is a human reaction to any change. So understanding this really changes the dynamic about how intentional we need to be in when we're navigating or leading through change. So the brain's primary job, okay, so the brain is amazing. And it really is what keeps us going, right? Keeps us surviving, right? So the job of the brain is survival before performance. It's about your safety first. It's about predictability being the default so that we conserve mental energy. And this is an automatic thing, right? Uncertainty increases cognitive demand. So when we're trying to work hard to understand something, we burn out faster because our brain is trying desperately to figure it out to identify whether something is safe or not. So, why employees resist? Well, if you're starting to see the picture of everything that's happening to us internally, when we're introduced to a change, you start to be a little bit more empathetic as to why employees can resist or do resist when a change is introduced. And I think that a lot of it has to do with how we do things, right? How we say things, our body language, how we explain things, whether we actually understand the why behind the change. So they may be asking themselves, will I still be successful? They may be asking, will I lose influence? They may be asking, can I learn this? Am I capable? Is this something that I can actually do? They might be asking, have I just been pushed out? Right? Do I still belong? So think about right now, we're dealing with so many shifts in the workplace, in the business world. As a professor, I see what's coming with the students as I'm teaching things like organizational behavior, entrepreneurship, and business. And so I can see that these are questions they actually have even before they get to the workforce because of things like AI, right? Which is a massive structural change. So thinking about these things really help us kind of understand change itself, but also what do we not see? What's happening behind the scenes in the mind of a person experiencing change? And then if you get even more curious and include the role of a manager, it becomes even more interesting. So people often resist uncertainty, not change itself. So change is kind of what triggers everything, but it triggers everything because of how it's introduced and how well we understand it and what it does. So Kotter is by far one of my favorite frameworks when I'm consulting, when I myself am managing. And the reason why is because I feel that it's easy to understand, and it also helps create a culture that you can maintain around change in a company if you do it right. And so those are the reasons I really enjoy Kotter's 8 steps. But there are multiple frameworks for change. So I don't want anybody to think this is the only way to do it. It's not. You really kind of have to explore and figure out what is a good fit for the group and the phase of business that they're in and that kind of thing. But for this series, we're going to cover Kotter. So Kotter step 1 is about creating urgency, right? And we're going to talk about what Kotter means by that, because he's not referencing panic, right? He's really talking about, do we create the right momentum around change? That's really what he's referencing. And so I think that it's important to make that distinction, because sometimes we're introduced to change and our immediate energy that we put out there is actually nervousness and panic, which filters through and becomes contagious. And it's actually probably not the best way to start because of how the brain responds to that. So healthy urgency versus fear-based urgency. So let's make that distinction. So healthy urgency is about purpose. We're doing this and we have to get it done because it's important. Fear-based urgency is about panic, right? It's about, oh my gosh, we're in trouble. The alarms are going off. Healthy urgency is about transparency. So healthy urgency is, let's make sure everybody understands this because this is important. Fear-based urgency around communication is rumors. Oh, I think this change is being introduced because Y, right? Or X. And so you're not really confirming, you're actually just adding to the rumor mill. That's actually creating a threat response in people. Healthy urgency is about a shared mission. This is important. This is going to get us further faster, whatever the case might be. Fear-based urgency is about compliance. You have to buy into this change or you're going to lose your job. That kind of thinking actually shuts people down. It does not work towards the ultimate objective. And healthy urgency is about action. It's about doing something important, knowing what the next step is. And fear-based urgency is about freeze response. stop this right now, right? So anytime we hear these kind of words, our brain does its own thing, right? You pause, you hesitate, you stop speaking up because you feel like maybe there's something that's threatening that's not necessarily good for you. And so we have to pay attention to these distinctions in what we do. So here's the neuroscience piece of this, right? When urgency is communicated effectively, attention increases, motivation improves, and goal-directed thinking activates. When urgency becomes fear, the threat response starts to dominate because, again, our brain is about self-preservation. Our brain is about staying safe. So creativity actually decreases, working memory declines, and decision quality suffers. And again, the brain naturally goes into this response because it's trying to save its energy. It's trying to ensure that we understand the threat clearly. So these are mechanisms that we activate, and sometimes we do it without really understanding it, right? So that's kind of the importance of Kotter's step one, is how to create urgency. Stepping into Kotter's second step is about building a guiding coalition. But before we go into step two, I'd love to ask, in case anybody has a situation that they'd like to share around the urgency scenario that we just talked about. And you can share in chat or you can unmute, but I'd love to hear, have you ever lived through a change where you felt the urgency not be one that was intentional, but more fear-based or panic when experiencing a change? So let me know if you want to unmute or if you want to share in chat. You can also raise your hand. I'd love to hear from somebody if you have a scenario that kind of matches what we just shared. Okay, if there's no shares, I'll keep going, but go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, there's definitely there's been some of that recently and change. We've had some folks leave that have been around for a while, and then moving structures and things like that that have seemed to be fear-based. We're going to do it this way type of thing, not necessarily taking on hints or questions or comments of how we've been successful up to a certain point or how we've done things. It's more of a round peg square hole type situation is what it feels like. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the challenges that you have with anything is skepticism, curiosity, right? Like those things are happening. People are wondering what's going to happen to them, seeing how these people are gone, things are being done differently, those types of things, new rules. And I think that's one of the things that is very apparent that needs to happen is the empathy of delivering the message.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's to a point, right? You can only hold someone's hand for so long, but I think initial delivery and things like that and understanding where people are coming from and trying to be empathetic to the situation of change is a challenge that occurs but needs to happen in order to bring everybody on board.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I agree with you. And I think, again, having an understanding of the neuroscience component at least has dramatically changed my perspective as to what people are not like. How are they responding because they really don't understand, or is this just a natural response to what I've triggered? And so it makes me a little bit more accountable and a little bit more thoughtful around how I'm approaching step one. And so thank you for sharing. The examples were spot on. Again, the intention sometimes isn't for it not to work, right? We sometimes just aren't familiar with these mechanisms enough. I know for a fact, for me, I did not get trained on this stuff coming up as a junior manager, and even moving into middle management and higher. This was not something that was introduced until much later, and it was a really more independent type of learning and research that landed us here. So thank you. So stepping into Kotter step two. So Kotter's second step is about bringing people together and making them feel like they're a part of something. And he refers to it as kind of putting together an army or building a coalition around the change, right? Which really means you start to create like a champion center, right? So why do coalitions matter during change? They matter because as human beings, we tend to behave in very predictable ways, right? And this is why it's so important in a role like that of a manager or a leader to understand these kind of natural responses, both psychologically, from a neuroscience perspective, and even behaviorally. People trust people before they trust the change, right? So if they see people succeeding with the change, and they can see it very clearly, then the feeling, the emotion behind it is, I can do it too, right? In most instances. So the social brain, right? So again, the brain constantly evaluates things like, can I trust this person? Do they understand me? Like, do they understand that, this is hard for me? Do they understand that I've never done this? Do they understand that I've never been trained on this, right? These are common things that are going to drive and kind of push that anxiety for people. Are they on my side? Do they care about my success, right? And the answer to some of these questions are largely felt and lived in an environment, right? So trust automatically reduces uncertainty. So if they could trust it, if they could see it, if they could taste it, right, they're going to have a higher likelihood of championing it, being a part of it, and becoming this coalition that Kotter talks about in step 2. So an effective coalition, with this in mind, of let's give them some testimonies. Let's start with the focus group so that they have evidence around how easy it is to do this, or what the steps are to get it right, or what the incentive is of doing this. Credibility is what it creates, right? Because again, seeing something, experiencing it, having somebody confirm it, those types of things put you at ease. There's influence in team members. There's diverse perspectives. There's consistent communication, and there's a degree of psychological safety when you create this kind of coalition or experience around the change that is happening. So the neuroscience connection there is that when you are a trusted leader, you reduce perceived threat just because there's that pre-existing trust. There's an increased openness. There's an improvement around learning because it's safe to do so, right? You're the kind of leader that allows for that to be a thing, and that accelerates adoption. And so when there isn't trust, and we don't understand how people's response comes in naturally, we tend to be guarded. We tend to get frustrated. We tend to actually work against trust. And so this is where change and implementation goes wrong. And so it's interesting because I've gotten a lot of questions around AI strategies and AI implementation in companies. And I actually have a friend who helps CEOs understand where they go wrong with implementations. And so I had a great conversation with him. And I said to him, Andreas, it's because of how the brain is responding to these things and the clarity around what's going on. There's a lot of gray as to the impact and how it's going to benefit each person. And this is where people go wrong, which is why it's difficult right now across the board when it comes to adopting AI and implementing in the right way in environments to find a clear return on investment, because the implementations are failing so often. And it's because of things like this, right? AI can't solve it for you. AI is not going to be able to step in that gap and create trust for you. So management strategies and making this change actionable, right? So let's step into some practical things. So if you're dealing with change, or if you go into change in the future and you have a role to play, keep it simple. It's a practice I've adopted for many years, is how simple can I make this versus be sophisticated, make it a lengthy project management deal, right? Try to make it as simple as possible for people. Definitely start by explaining why. Connect change to purpose. What is the purpose of this change? Who does it benefit? Share data without creating alarm. Try to remain objective and try to show transparently, what are the wins? What do we need to improve? What is the data showing? How is this succeeding? And be honest when it's not, because that's where people start to either gain trust for the change process or work against it. And give employees a role in the solution. Make them the most important piece or source of information and help them feel that way, because it's true. It's not lip service. We actually need to know what's not working for them in order for change to be successfully adopted. So make them feel important in that process. Leadership behaviors that reduce resistance are these, right? So we have the management component, which is what we just talked about, making it practical. And then you have the leadership behavior, which reinforces some of what we talked about today. You want to listen before persuading, right? Don't push things on people. They're not going to, their brain is not going to buy in until there's clarity around it. So just saying, trust me, or, things like that. No, you have to actually create an environment where that can actually happen. Acknowledge uncertainty, right? Literally make a list of what we're not clear on that we're trying to figure out through this pilot, through this change. Let them know that you see the uncertainty, not that you're hiding it. Communicate frequently. Have your touch points, create a cadence, something that they can predict. Predictability is a great, wonderful thing when it comes to trust from a brain perspective. If it's predictable, it's easier to trust. Right. And so when we create cadences in a project, when we create cadences around change, we're designing that trust. Right. And so things like that actually work really well. Explain the purpose. Why are we doing this at all? Right? What are the benefits? And sometimes as a leader, when you're going through this process in this way, you start to see that you are actually not clear on these areas, which should be a red flag. It should help you to pull back and get those answers or redirect the change, right? Because not having the answer to these things means that it hasn't been well thought out and it might not be to your benefit. Invite participation in this process and celebrate every win when it comes to change. Every win should be celebrated because change is difficult. And you want people to feel reinforced in their adoption, incentivized, right? Motivated towards that end game. So replace things like, I need everyone on board. So if you're a manager who says that commonly, I'm going to challenge you to reword that a little bit, because it actually is more forceful and controlling. Change it with, help me understand what's making this difficult. Get a little bit more curious, because just the fact that you open that up invites trust in a little bit more, right? We, in the workforce, because in management we have authority, sometimes we default to just do this. And we have to remember that that's just really working against how brains work. It just really is backwards thinking, but we've seen it, we've lived it, we've adopted things like that as a habit. And the workplace has changed. It's not authority and control driven anymore. And so you have people who actually push back in those moments. So reflection and action planning. So as you're thinking about change and kind of shifting your mind around it and applying frameworks that are proven, like Kotter's, think about, how do I typically communicate urgency? Like, do you know how to create that kind of healthy urgency, or are you defaulting more towards the other kind? Do I unintentionally create fear? And I think that's a really honest question. I can tell you that I definitely did before, especially when I was a younger manager. I came to terms with that more than a few years ago. And I was like, wow, I created harmful neural pathways and had no idea I was doing that. And that's okay, because this is how you start to understand the power that you have in every transaction as a manager and a leader. Ask yourself, who would be part of my guiding coalition? Who can you actually turn into a champion for what you're doing? Who understands what you're doing really well and can be an example? And if there's nobody in your group, that should be something to reflect about, because then maybe nobody understands it. And maybe we haven't been clear enough, and we have to own that. What conversation do I need to have this week? Who do I need to explain this to and maybe get some data around, right? So those are really deep questions when you're in the middle of change and when you're thinking about your effectiveness. And I think that this is what makes, honestly, what makes us at Management Cues different, is that we care about the experience people are having, not just teaching you about the topics or the frameworks or the how-to. There's just so much more to this. And we live in these environments every day, right? So you're going to get this brain ready tool This is a proprietary tool designed at Management Cues. And for registering and participating in the webinar today, you're going to get access to this tool. And it's going to cover step 1 and step 2. And it's going to show you how to navigate through it. So you'll get it emailed, it's downloadable. And the next time you're moving through a change, you could literally go through the checklist and check yourself, right? Check to see if you're actually working against a brain-based approach, and what you can change. And you can make it your own. And if it works, stick to that. Right? If it works for you, if it works in your environment, now you have a proven framework and you know how to move through these steps in a way that's genuine, that's authentic, and is actually working in alignment with how the brain responds versus working against it. Okay, so I'll open it up to any questions and comments or feedback that you might have. And each of our sessions are going to be short and sweet, kind of like this, just so that we can kind of focus on some important stuff. So let me know in chat, or you're free to unmute if you have any questions or anything you'd like to share. All right, we are streaming live, so you're also going to get a copy of the recording and a copy of the deck. Feel free to share it with whoever you want to share it with. We are all about providing access. So in addition to our webinars and the events that we host, we also have training programs that are brain-based, kind of like what you experienced today. We have tools. I love designing tools with our team. So we have our management planner, which walks people through different functions of management and leadership. We have neuroscience studies. They're accessible to you on our website. So if you're curious about what our program resulted in when we had it tested by neuroengineers and neuroscientists, we have all of that available. If you're curious and want to have a consultation with me, it's free. You could schedule it anytime. These are all hyperlinks that are going to be on the deck that you receive. Feel free to take a look at it. We also have month-to-month memberships to keep people trained all year round, whether you're an individual manager, a team of managers, or an executive who's kind of struggling with that leadership versus management, experience with your teams. We've got you covered. And we also wanted to share, we believe in providing access and giving back. And so part of what we do is we provide proceeds to organizations like EXP, the Opportunity Engine, which gives youth opportunities to intern and experience career pathways that they wouldn't usually have access to. So if you buy our journal here that you see, part of that goes to them, so we can help people experience the workforce in very different ways. Okay, with that said, next week, we're going to do a week 2. We're going to cover steps 3 and 4. And so we'll meet again on Thursday, and we're going to be covering rewiring mindsets, creating the vision, and enlisting others. And next week, I'll have a co-host, Kathy Markov. And so she is our leadership and culture strategist at Management Cues, and has such a great background and experience. And I know, Kathy, you're on the call. I don't know if you want to share anything to get people excited for next week, but feel free to share anything if you'd like.
Hi, these are so important. Change is inevitable. We're going to be experiencing more and more change, and our ability to handle it well is not only important for us individually, but it really demonstrates our leadership abilities. And so learning all of this wonderful content from you, Dr. Mayra, is really fantastic. And I'm looking forward to co-presenting with you tomorrow. I mean, next week. I'm ready to go. Let's do it tomorrow. No.
Tomorrow.
A week from today. Same time, same place, right?
That's right. Thank you. Yeah. And I'm excited to co-host with Kathy. Kathy has worked with executive teams. She's worked in the private and nonprofit space. And so she's kind of seen people get stuck, and she's seen what was required to guide them through it. And so we're excited to hear from her. I hope that you enjoyed our short and sweet webinar today. And that's it for today. So thank you so much for joining. I appreciate you sharing your experience. And we'll see you next time.
One quick question. Are we auto signed into next week, or do we need to go out and make sure we're registered?
Great question. So in the way that Eventbrite is set up, you actually have to sign up for each, I was going to say episode, but for each webinar series. Okay. So if you haven't signed up, please do. When you get your deck and your materials and your tool within the next 24 hours, the link to the next session will be included on there so that you don't forget to sign up.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, everybody have a great day, and I can't wait for next week.